Chapter 8, Part 2, The Art of Deception. The harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room flickered overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow that reflected off the steel table between Aura Kheen, now going by the name Vanessa Sinclair, and the grim-faced officers seated across from her. She could hear the low hum of the cruise ship's engines vibrating through the walls, a constant reminder of the precarious situation she was in. Her wrists throbbed from the handcuffs that had been removed only minutes earlier, leaving red marks against her pale skin. But pain was something Alex was well acquainted with. She knew how to compartmentalize it, how to tuck it away like a secret, buried beneath layers of seduction and charm. She had been led through the ship like a lamb to slaughter, her mind racing with strategies, plans, and contingency maneuvers. Now, as she faced the two officers who had interrupted her latest conquest, she knew this was her most dangerous game yet. If she failed, there would be no escape this time, only cold, steel bars, and the end of her reign as the Queen of Shadows. The officers, a grizzled veteran with a square jaw and a younger, eager-looking man whose hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through papers, were watching her closely. They expected her to crack, to fold under the pressure. But Alex had been playing this game far longer than they had. "Let's start from the beginning," the older officer growled, his voice a low rumble. "Who are you really, Miss Sinclair? And what were you doing in Victor Lansing's suite with a garrote in your hand?" Alex let out a soft, almost musical laugh, tilting her head to the side as if amused by the absurdity of it all. "You've made a terrible mistake," she purred, her voice honeyed and smooth. She adjusted her posture, subtly pushing her chest forward, her body language designed to disarm and distract. "Victor invited me to his suite. We were simply enjoying each other's company. I have no idea where this wild accusation is coming from." The younger officer's eyes flicked to her neckline, where the thin fabric of her dress clung to her curves. His cheeks flushed slightly, his resolve wavering. But the older officer was not so easily swayed. "We have witnesses," he barked, leaning forward, his fists clenched on the table. People heard screams. "The ship's security found you straddling him with a knife. How do you explain that?" Alex sighed softly, as if the weight of the world rested on her slender shoulders. She lowered her head, allowing a single tear to roll down her cheek. She knew how to play the role of the distressed woman to perfection. It was a role she had crafted over years of practice, one that had allowed her to slip out of countless tight spots. I was trying to protect myself," she stammered, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "Victor, he was drunk. He got rough. I thought I was going to die. The knife. It was just to scare him, to defend myself." She allowed her voice to crack, her shoulders shaking slightly as she let out a sob. "Please, you have to believe me." The younger officer's face softened. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly affected by her display. But the older one, Detective Markson, wasn't buying it. His eyes narrowed as he watched her, as if trying to peel back the layers of her carefully constructed facade. "That's a nice story," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "But it doesn't explain why your fingerprints were found on the garrote or why you had blood under your nails." Alex's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let the panic show on her face. Instead, she straightened up, letting the tears dry on her cheeks. She was done playing the victim. It was time for a new approach. "I see what's happening here," she said, her voice turning cold, her demeanor shifting like a switch had been flipped. "This is all a setup, isn't it? Victor's enemies must have paid you to frame me. Do you have any idea who he really is? The kind of power he holds?" The officers exchanged glances. Alex knew she was taking a risk, but she could see the doubt flickering in their eyes. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Victor's gold mining business isn't just about gold," she continued. "There are other interests involved. Dangerous interests. I've seen things that would ruin him if they came to light." She let that statement hang in the air, the implication heavy. I think you know exactly what I mean. Markson's eyes darted to his partner, uncertainty creeping into his features. The younger officer's resolve was already crumbling, she could see it in the way his fingers drummed nervously against the table. Alex decided it was time to go for the kill. She leaned back, crossing her legs slowly, letting her skirt ride up just enough to distract them. "Let's make this easy for all of us," she said, her voice now as smooth as velvet. "You can keep me here, interrogating me for hours, but that won't change the fact that Victor Lansing's associates won't take kindly to their business being exposed. And trust me, they have ways of making people disappear." The threat was subtle, but it hit its mark. She could see the younger officer swallow hard, sweat beading at his temple. Even Markson seemed to hesitate, weighing the risks. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. Alex smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a chill down his spine. "Try me," she whispered. "But if I were you, I'd let me go. Because if something happens to me, people will start asking questions. Questions that you won't want to answer." For a long, tense moment, the room was silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Then, finally, Markson stood up, pushing his chair back with a screech. He motioned to his partner, who was already reaching for the keys to her cuffs. "You're free to go," he said grudgingly, his jaw clenched. "But don't think for a second that we're done here. We'll be watching you." "Oh, I'm sure you will," Alex replied with a smirk, rubbing her wrists as the handcuffs fell away. She stood up, her confidence fully restored, and sauntered out of the room without a backward glance. The moment she was back in the corridors of the ship, she slipped into the shadows, her mind already working on her next move. She needed to disappear again, to shed this identity like a snake shedding its skin. But first, she had to cover her tracks. Her freedom had come at a cost, and she knew the clock was ticking. The whispers in her mind were louder than ever, urging her to kill, to tie up loose ends before they came back to haunt her. But for now, she would bide her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She was the Queen of Shadows, and this game was far from over.